Okay, being a little after 1, we will call the meeting to order of the Marathon County Extension Education Economics Development Committee. Pledge of Allegiance. Number 3, public comment. We have no public comment. Number 4, approve the February 1st EEED committee minutes. I will take a motion. Motion by Becky. Second by Kim. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Number 5, public or policy issues discussion and potential committee determination. Number 6, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolutions, or policy. 6A, consideration of an initial resolution declaring the official intent of Marathon County, Wisconsin to reimburse certain original expenditures related to the construction of certain solid waste facilities from the proceeds of one or more series of tax-exempt conduct revenue bond to be issued by county after the payment of such original expenditures of RDF Development 1 LLC and other entities of the AAMP American 2 LLC is the sole member. And this is Andy first. Okay, Andy, you're up.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so my name's Andy Dvorak. I'm the VP of Business Development for AMP Americas. We are a renewable natural gas development company. I'm going to go through and give a little bit of history on the company, talk a little bit about a project that we're working on. Ultimately, what I'm here for is we are seeking what's called a inducement resolution at a county level, such that we want to keep open the option to use tax-exempt conduit revenue bonds for the financing of a project that we're looking to build at the Miltram Dairy. The mechanism was established through the Economic Development Corporation in Wisconsin. This is similar in other states, and we've gone through this process in other states. Essentially, it allows the county an opportunity to support economic development within the county without creating capital exposure of the county to such a bond process. So what we're doing does not impact the county's ability to borrow money. It does not expose the county to any liability. It's simply that we as an entity have to go through the county as a conduit to go through these bond issues process. We're not here today seeking to go through the actual process of the bond issuance. The reason we're here is that the way this process works is in order for us to qualify dollars spent, we have to have a resolution in place with the county before we actually spend those dollars. We do have a 60-day look back on dollars spent, but if we get a resolution after we spend the money, then those dollars no longer qualify. So we're here seeking an inducement resolution that allows us to continue to develop the project and move forward such that we keep those dollars qualified. The timeline we're looking at is we'd like to get this in place before the end of quarter number 2 of this year, and I'll talk a little bit about where we are as far as the status of the project as such. So just a brief background on AMP Americas. We've been around. Okay, sorry. We've been around since 2011, and we have 14 projects across numerous states. I'll show you here in a second those projects. In 2022, we produced 1.3 million MMBTUs of gas. In 23, we produced about 1.5. Just to get a sense of what that means is A full-size milking Holstein produces about 20 MMBTUs of gas per year if you're able to harness their manure and correctly and effectively extract the methane gas or the biogas that comes from the animal's manure, and therefore convert that into a gas that gets injected into the pipeline and eventually delivered into the market. The 1.3 million MMBTU in year 22 was about a 15% market share. So in the grand scheme of natural gas volumes, the amount that we produce is not hugely significant. However, the carbon abatement level in our gas is significant. And the reason is that when you abate methane from a dairy operation, you prevent that methane from going to the atmosphere and causing the effects of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. You can use that gas in the combustion and transportation, and therefore that methane gets converted into CO2. It's and methane is about 25 times more potent than CO2, so we get the benefit of that multiplication process as far as the greenhouse gas abatement scenario. We could spend a lot of time going through that, and I can answer some questions about it, but I want to give a little bit of background on that. So on the next slide, you can see a map of facilities that we have. We have operating assets in Idaho, in Kansas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, most recently, as well as Indiana, where we started our activities. The project we have in Darlington, Wisconsin, just commissioned at the end of 2023. We're very excited about that project, and our next one to commission is the one in Kansas, which is about twice the size as the one in Wisconsin. We have a slew of projects across the country that we're looking at and looking to develop, subject to how we finance the projects, how we deal with the offtake and the sale of the gas, and construction and so on and so forth. So our management team has been in this space for many, many years. I used to do carbon development internationally under the Kyoto Protocol. I built anaerobic digesters in Southeast Asia and Africa, as well as Central America. Others have done this in various parts, and we have a lot of other folks that have come to us just simply from the finance space. This is a tried and true finance situation where we invest capital and we look for returns on our capital. The returns on our capital come from three revenue sources today. It's the sale of the gas itself, the sale of the renewable identification numbers, which are credits created under the EPA program. It's a federal program. And we also generate credits under the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard program. That's the existing market today. The future of renewable natural gas is the use of that gas in other things than transportation. Today, transportation is the leading revenue generator, but there are opportunities in the hydrogen space, in the renewable ammonia space, in building heating issues. That's where we're going to see some real opportunity. So the market is growing exponentially. Now to talk a little bit about the project. So we are working with the Miltrum Dairy, and they were founded in 1988. They have about 3,000 milking cows on their existing facility, and then they have another facility, a dry cow facility down the road that we're looking to possibly incorporate. The management of manure is where the rubber hits the road in our space, because depending upon how manure is managed on a dairy, the dairy gets X number of credits generated or Y number of credits generated. The issue is that the longer the manure sits in a lagoon and therefore generates methane through the decomposition, the more credits that we get if we mitigate that actual process. And so when we look at farms, we look at characteristics of the farms and how they manage their manure to determine and estimate what their scoring is going to be. Their scoring is going to dictate if they get more or less credits. More or less credits means more or less revenue on the project. We have to use that to underwrite our project and determine the economics of it. This is in the scheme of renewable natural gas. This is a small project. This is not a small dairy, but it's a small project in our space. And the reason that is that the cost for me to get into the pipe, the cost of me to develop the project is not directly linear. Meaning for me to get into a pipe, it doesn't matter if I'm putting in 100 MMBTUs or I'm putting in 1 million MMBTUs. The cost is generally the same. So it's a market lends itself to larger operations. There are not as many large operations left in the dairy space for opportunities here. We've built a number of them. Our competitors have built a number of them. And so what the industry is forced to go down to the smaller scale. The reason this is important is that the cost to build projects that are smaller are harder to do. But there's a lot of them. So we're looking for different mechanisms to build these. The reason why a conduit tax-exempt revenue bond is important, it's a mechanism for us to get into a smaller market where there are a lot of opportunities, but they're just harder to do economically. Traditionally, how these projects have been financed, ourselves as well as Novela and others in the space, has been 100% equity, where bonding and debt has not played a role. That has a lot to do with the markets that we sell the gas and the nascentness of that market and the fluidity of that market. It's hard to underwrite the revenues because they're at risk, which is why it's something that entities like ourselves like to do, but that it's a risky transaction. So we look at different finance mechanisms. Tax-exempt conduit bonds is becoming more important as we look to build these projects. So the gist of what we're trying to do is we are going to take the manure from the cows, and immediately upon the manure leaving the barns, it traditionally goes through into either a sand lane or into some form of separation or not, and then goes into a lagoon for storage. Farms store manure for a number of months because they can't apply their manure all the time, 24/7, 365, because they have crops in the field, and if they apply the manure, it causes problems for crop management. So typically farms, especially here in the Midwest, apply 2-3 times a year. While that manure is sitting in the lagoon, it generates the emissions that we're mitigating. So we capture the manure in the project activity before it gets to the lagoon on a going forward basis, and then we leave that manure in our tank system for up to 30 days. 100% natural bacteria that is already in the cow's stomach comes along with that manure when it goes into the tanks. The bacteria consumes organic components within the manure, and the byproduct of that consumption is the burping of methane gas in the form of biogas. Biogas is a gas that is about 50% CO2, 50% methane, and the balance is some hydrogen sulfide and some water, some other things we need to scrub out. When we clean the gas, we remove everything except for the methane. So the gas that we produce coming out of our anaerobic digester and our cleanup technology goes into the pipe at about 95 to 98% methane. It's no different than the natural gas that's already in the pipeline, and we need to meet a specification of quality to get into that pipe, and then it becomes a gas that's sold as a commodity in that pipe system. This project, like I said, is on the smaller size, so there will be a single large above-ground tank system. We'll have an H2S removal system. Hydrogen sulfide is a byproduct that comes from biogas, that is in the biogas stream, so we scrub that out. What's left is typically an elemental sulfur, which then can be reincorporated into the manure process and land applied. It's actually very beneficial for crops. We also scrub out the CO2. Current technology is to scrub that CO2 using various types of technology. In this case, we're going to use a membrane, which is basically a long straw where the CO2 goes through and the methane goes a different direction because of the size of that molecule. We scrub out the CO2 and we're going to vent that CO2 back to the atmosphere. Now you would ask, why are we venting CO2 when we're trying to create a project that mitigates greenhouse gas emissions? There's no current market right now for this type of CO2. There is going to be a market for this in the future. It could be food grade or it could be different types of carbon capture and sequestration, but it's not here today. So that's an opportunity that we have in the future. But for right now, we vent that to the atmosphere, and we're trying to hold on to the methane, which is the most important, because it has the largest potential value in being converted from methane to CO2, and therefore we're capturing that value in that conversion process. Certain projects, in this case, require different oxygen levels or non-oxygen levels going into the pipe. So we'll have some oxygen generator in this project because that helps us actually manage the H2S in vessel as opposed to using a chemical process. So we will inject a little bit of oxygen back into the system, which will create there's a chemical process that occurs and helps knock down the H2S level so that when we manage it, we can do that more economically. H2S is the Achilles heel in our space as far as technology. It's the hardest thing to get out, the most cost intensive piece to the mix, even though CO2 is 50% of your gas and H2S is on a parts per million basis. H2S is also a very dangerous gas, and so safety is paramount to our operations. In all of our operations, we have hydrogen sulfide monitoring equipments both in our plants and on our personnel. We have not had any issues or incidents with H2S across all of our projects, but it's something we take very seriously in our process. And then we do show a picture on slide number 8, the next slide, of a typical installation. This is not one of our installations. This is one in New York. The reason why this picture is in here and not a picture of Darlington is that when I submitted this packet for consideration last year, we were not yet done with the Darlington project. Now, we'd be happy to host a tour out at that facility where we can see that asset in operation. At our Darlington facility, we have 2 above-ground tank systems, and we have an injection facility with the Alliant pipeline at that facility. The pipeline of interconnect here is that we're looking at for Miltram is the We Energies pipeline. So the farm currently has natural gas service. The reason that this is important is we use natural gas in the production of renewable gas. Our digesters need to maintain a temperature of about 100 to 105 degrees for the bugs to be happy. The bugs also need a certain pH so that they thrive, and when they thrive, they produce more gas. Similar to the dairy operation, happy cow, large milk production, happy bugs, very good biogas production. So we want to keep our bugs happy, so they need to be warm and they have to have the right temperature, but we cultivate them and we care for them immensely in the process. So we do need to use natural gas to heat our digesters. We run boilers to do that, and we'll go through air permitting process to make that happen. On a rough order of magnitude, we use about 1/4 of the gas we produce in the operation of our assets, sometimes a little bit more in the winter months, as far as on a volumetric basis for what we're going to make and inject into the pipeline. So in order for this to happen, the farm already has some natural gas service, but it doesn't have the level of service that we need for our operation because we use more than the farm is currently using. So we're looking at some system upgrades with We Energies, and we're also looking for an interconnection into them. So we will increase the ability to get gas, and we will also create a meter that sends gas to them. Now, some of that gas we produce, we're actually going to use on a physical level, but there's a process where you can separate the physical gas from the credits themselves. It's a concept known as book and claim, and I could spend hours talking you through that process, but by and large, the way it works is you put gas in the pipeline, and immediately downstream of that, you can use a second meter and pull natural gas out because we're injecting renewable gas and we're pulling out natural gas. And then when we sell the gas into the transportation market, we use a concept of book and claim where we deliver that gas into California and the trucks use the gas, and that's where the credits are generated. It's the way I describe this is this is very common in the space for renewable electricity as well as renewable gas. The way I describe it is if you take an eyedropper and you drop 5 eyedrops on one side of the lake and you pull 5 eyedrops out on the other side, net, it matches, and therefore that lake is acting as a book and claim process, similar to what we do on paper and moving the gas into the market. Because the natural gas infrastructure in the United States is one big lake, is the way I would describe it. So, again, just to kind of sum up what we're looking for is we're looking for an inducement resolution at a county board level, which would allow us to qualify funds that we will spend on this project. We've asked for an allocation amount about $45 million. Now that is higher than we believe the project is going to cost because when we put this package together, we were dealing with significant supply chain issues, cost escalations, post-COVID cost increases by contractors and so on and so forth. The dollars that we actually use in the bonding process will match the dollars that we spend. So there's no issue there on the numbers matching because they will have to at the end of the day. What's most important for the county is there is no economic exposure to the county in doing this process. As a conduit, you're simply saying, we vouch that these guys are going to do it. We would like this to happen because they're going to bring economic development to our county. The economic development that we're going to bring, as you can see in submitting this, we also have submitted some documentation about labor. So in order for this project to happen, we're going to have a labor construction level influx in the area of many dozens of people to build the project. It's on the order of 40 individuals at any given time as we build this project out. Once the asset is fully operational, these systems are very smart systems, so you can run them 24/7 with a smartphone, have alarm systems that automatically turn on and off, and just like any other plant these days, labor is the Achilles heel of the industry. But the type of labor that we need for this type of project is significantly skilled. So a lot of the people that work in these plants come from the oil patch. highly educated engineers. These are higher paid individuals. They're not your typical laborer that you're going to find on a farm. And we have a full cultivating process for labor throughout our assets. So when we build a new asset, we early hire. We train those people on existing farms that we have on the AMP way, as we call it, as far as our operations, because we own all these assets and we also operate all these assets with our own staff. And then all of our staff, as they escalate through their career, can move around from asset to asset as we move into plant managers and different levels of tech, so on and so forth. So these are highly skilled positions, and people, like I said, come from the oil patch in different areas of expertise, and they tend to always be an engineer in some form or fashion. So there is going to be significant economic development as far as the construction coming to the county, the ongoing tax revenue to the county, as well as the labor that is here, as well as any of the other benefits that come along with this. In all of the projects we work on across the country, we significantly put ourselves into the community. We're sponsors of numerous cultural activities, 4-H entities. We have a scholarship program where we're trying to cultivate next-gen farming young people to get excited back into the space. A lot of young farmers are interested in waste management and different types of renewable energy, and we found that this is an area that they really appreciate. We've also found that these are opportunities that work on both sides of the aisle. We generate revenues in rural communities that are not often benefiting from these things, and we bring significant job growth and accolades to these communities, and we're trying to prop up the agricultural space in the process. So by and large, we've been around a long time. We'd like to keep the option open for revenue bonds, conduit tax-exempt bonds. We are not committed yet to do the bond process, but we need to have an inducement in place before we can start spending dollars. So let me stop there for any questions, and hopefully I didn't put anybody to sleep in the process.
Thank you very much, Andy. Do we have questions from the committee or other supervisors? Supervisor Marash.
Thank you. So maybe you mentioned it, but how long does it take to build? And then my other question would be, you mentioned you early hire and train your staff, and most of them come from oil patches, but do you utilize any local subcontractors at all?
Those are very good questions. So first and foremost, as far as local staff, it's imperative for us to work with the dairy and their electricians as well as their plumbers as best we can, subject to not getting purged on pricing. But the reason we do that is a lot of times in agricultural applications, especially in the farming applications, the concept of blueprints and knowing exactly where pipes are is doesn't typically go beyond some people having it in their head. And so using local labor that has an experience working with that dairy is very important to our process, so that we know exactly where things are, we know how things are built, because they don't use, oftentimes, and I don't want to throw agriculture under the bus in any form or fashion, but you don't typically see the same level of documentation around as-built and so on and so forth. So to be most efficient, we like to work with local labor for a number of reasons there. We also, ironically, for our Darlington project, the 2 techs that we hired for that project actually they live within miles of the facility. However, they came from the oil patch as far as experience. They were engineers that had worked in various locations throughout the country. So we want to apply locally because it's easier to retain employees if they're local. They also have relationships with the dairy, which is always good, family relationships, community, so on and so forth. So where we can, we like to hire local so long as we can get the right type of staff to get that done. Can't remember, did I answer all the questions or were there? Oh, timing, sorry. The timeline to build these projects from full contracting to full installations, I'd say somewhere around a year, subject to permit approvals and other issues you have to deal with. All these projects have to go through air permitting process. All of them have to go through different local, use permits that you have to change at a county level, and subject to those processes all going through on a timely fashion. The actual construction time on the project is relatively quick. It's everything getting lined up, getting all your ducks in a row. The lead time on equipment has become more problematic. We do see some lead time these days that used to be a matter of 20 weeks going up to 60 or even longer. So we've seen supply chain issues hit this market significantly. A lot of these are built for purpose. Pieces of equipment, they're specific to the asset. They're not generally sitting on the shelf. So lead time can be a big issue as well. And the biggest one tends to be the utility. Utilities aren't known to be, racers in any form or fashion, and so we're subject to their timelines and when they would like to get things done as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Supervisor Lemmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still not clear on the numbers of people that will be hired. You said 40 individuals for the labor. Is that just while it's being built? How many permanent new jobs will be created once it's up and running?
Yeah, so we have some existing staff already in the state of Wisconsin. So when we build this project, we will train that staff at our Darlington facility. The Darlington facility has 2 full-time operators. This facility will have a similar level of staffing when it is fully up and running. The staffing during construction is going to vary depending upon the timing and when you line up the various jobs, but it tends to be somewhere in the order of 40 full-time individuals over the course of that year in some form or fashion. Typically what we actually do is we look at number of hours for engineering, design, construction, so on and so forth. Some of that is off-site, some of it is local as far as where they're going to be stationed when they do the work. They don't need to be here to do the engineering and the design per se. But you're going to see a big number up front for construction, and then you're going to see it come down to about 2 individuals long-term to operate the asset.
And then follow up, if you could just talk to me a little bit about the other benefits to economics. You said there's tax revenues. Can you expand on the tax revenues?
Sure. So you're going to have, obviously, these are projects that generate revenues. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this. So there's going to be taxes on the revenues that we generate. How much of that trickles down to state versus local is subject to state issues. But there's going to be local tax issues associated with employment. Like I said, these are higher paid individuals than laborers, so you're going to have a slightly higher per FTE level of tax revenue. And then you're also going to have property tax issues associated with the project in and of itself, as well as the pipeline upgrades that we're going to go through with the utility. So I don't have an exact number as far as tax revenue basis, but it's larger than zero, I guess is the best way. And more importantly, we're not seeking any form of TIF funding at this time. We're not looking for any tax exempt. We're not looking for any of that type of tax exempt process. The bonding is separate, but as far as local tax relief, we're not seeking any of that local tax relief at this time.
So the property, will you be owning that and then changing the zoning of it? So it's going to change from agricultural to manufacturing?
Correct. So you have to go through a CUP process for these projects. So we will be in front of the right board here to go through that CUP process. That's what we do on all of our projects. It is our what we like to do is own the piece of property. The rationale behind owning it as opposed to leasing it, we used to lease properties, and it became very complicated when you're dealing with agriculture entities and their loans and different who has primary, secondary benefits under those processes and the SNDAs that you have to go through. So what we typically do is we put in place a procedure where we purchase the property from the farmer. Now, no farmer wants to give you a postage stamp piece of their property. However, we attach the right of that farmer to purchase back that property at the end of the term of the agreement. So it acts similar to a lease, but legally it's a land purchase process.
And how long do you expect the lease or the project to be live?
These are projects that are typically 20 to 30 years in length. The technology has a life up to that level. Subject to extensions as well, subject to market opportunities, but these are long-term relationships, so these are 20 to 30-year type transactions.
Okay, one more, sorry, everybody. The pipeline, I just want to talk a little bit about how does that work, because do you then own all of that property? If you could maybe, Mr. Administrator, could go back to the picture of the map of the farm with the teal line. is that all going to be your property then, or do you get right of way? How does that all work, and how does that fit in with our zoning?
So the way this works is that we pay for all of these upgrades, but we don't own any of this infrastructure. So a utility has a monopoly in the area. So in order for me to get into their pipeline, I have to pay for access, and I have to pay for systems upgrades in order for them to accommodate our gas going in, as well as pay for accommodation for me to increase the amount that I take from them. So we have a process known as interconnection with them, and that's a two-pronged approach. One is gas going in and gas coming out. So there's two different meters that have to be purchased and paid for, and in this case, different pipeline infrastructure needs to be upgraded. So what they're looking to do here is they're looking to extend a new lateral to us, which is the light color line on the map. And we will pay for all of that lateral to come to us. We will not own that lateral. We simply, it's a cost in aid of construction is what it's called. So we pay them the money that it costs to build it. They build it at their spec, and then they own and operate that on a going forward basis.
So you are not monitoring and making sure that that pipeline is not leaking and is, or do they do that?
That pipeline becomes part of the utilities infrastructure, as if they were to do it. They build it, they own it, they operate it, so it's 100% under their purview, and they manage that asset. As it goes under their balance sheet as an asset. In addition to the cost that we pay, the cost in aid of construction, we also typically pay a tax gross-up fee to them, which basically means we pay to build it, and then when it goes on their balance sheet, they have to pay taxes because it's a new asset going on their balance sheet. We have to pay for that tax associated with that process. So this is a situation. We do have some situations where we have owned and operated laterals ourselves. In Indiana and Minnesota, we have biogas laterals and we have natural gas laterals that we've purchased, either put in public or private right-of-way. In this case, 100% of this pipe would be owned and operated by We Energies, and it would go into a public right-of-way. They would go through a county process like any other time they do it, where they would petition to get that gas put in, that pipeline put in the lateral, and it's no different than any other lateral that would do in any form or fashion. Because in order for me to get into that lateral, on the red dot, which is at the farm, I have to meet a specification which meter exceeds the quality in that pipe. Otherwise, I can't get in that pipe. So any gas in that pipe meets all their specifications for everything else.
If I can just add one thing, I think that's, certainly I'm not an expert in the area, but with our work at the landfill, very similar process about getting that interconnect into the existing A&R pipeline that runs along Highway 29. In my discussions with the solid waste director, it's the same sort of process. The utility takes ownership of everything from the facility. They monitor that quality of gas. They actually have a gate that if your gas isn't good, that gate gets shut off, and that's really, really expensive to have that reopened. So to Mr. Dvorak's point, they monitor their side of that equipment, and essentially everything once it leaves the facility is their side.
We actually have a two-pronged approach. We have monitoring equipment on our side, which is called a gas chromatograph. It measures all the constituents in the gas, and we have to you program it to meet a certain spec. If we miss that spec, we self-shut in, and we reprocess the gas to fix it to meet that quality. Because if it does go past our meter into their meter and we don't meet quality, they shut the gate, and then it's not always a fast process for them to reopen that gate, so we don't want that to happen if we don't have to. So we self-police, and it's very expensive to do that because you have to have a chromatograph on each side of that gate, but that's what we do to maintain uptime as best we can. Sure.
So We Energy consumers, do they get any benefit from the natural gas you put into the pipeline?
So it's a good question. There's a couple ways that this could be a benefit to the ratepayers. The first is we're paying for infrastructure upgrades. So the utility is not using any rate-based dollars or using any of their own dollars to make their upgrades, and they make it to their specs. So the biggest benefit to the rate base is the fact that system upgrades are occurring and they don't have to pay a nickel in the process. The second benefit can be the sale of the brown gas, as we call it. So when the gas enters and goes past that red dot, on the other side of that red dot, it's natural gas. It's not renewable gas because of this concept I told you about book and claim. So we can sell that gas to We Energies directly, which is typically what we do, or we could sell that gas to another marketer. The reason why We Energies would like to do that is typically local distribution companies buy their natural gas from larger transmission pipelines, and those larger transmission pipelines charge a transportation fee in addition to the commodity fee. When we inject the gas locally, we don't have any transportation costs because we're local. And so net, it tends to be a lower cost scenario for ratepayers to buy local gas under these systems. So those are the two benefits that they typically see. Every scenario is different. Every utility is different. Sometimes we go into local distribution. Sometimes we go into transportation. Sometimes we go into different types of pipe that have different scenarios. This is a scenario where We Energies, our local distribution, they buy their gas from a large gas supplier like A&R, and A&R charges a rate. Now, we have run into situations where we've seen rates for transportation spike by 70, 80% year over year. So this can be a very significant benefit to the local distribution companies. We've had local distribution companies that actually said, we'll pay for the upgrades because it's cheaper for us to finance the upgrades and get your gas than it is to continue to buy gas from the big boys. But it's a case-by-case scenario.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Any other questions from the committee? Excuse me. So then we would need a motion, I think, or do we do both at once? Do we do them individually?
It's agendized separately, and I just want to make sure, if you want to clarify your timeline, it's certainly agendized for you to take action today if the committee would take action and forward it on to the county board for consideration, again, for that initial authorizing resolution. So just to ground everyone, this is very similar to the last project that the full board evaluated a couple of months ago. It's envisioning, as was shared with you by Mr. Dvorak, that the county would serve as that, essentially the industrial revenue conduit bonding agent under 66.1103 of the statutes. Doesn't mandate you to go through with the final resolution, but you could take action today if you wished. On your timeline, though, I just want to make sure, you're not pushing for action
So
today.
we're not pushing for immediate action. We want to make sure the county is comfortable with what we're doing in the process we're going through. The thing that's most important is we'd like to continue to move forward with the project. We'd like to start spending capital to move the project forward, and we're holding off in doing that until we have the inducement resolution process buttoned up so that we can make sure those dollars qualify. We'd like to get this done in the second quarter. So, as best as comfortable as people are, we'd like to move this forward, but nobody has a gun to their head in the process.
So with that background, again, you're all very familiar with where we are in the board terms, and whether, how you want to handle moving it forward or not is entirely up to you. But I thought that grounding of kind of where you're at and where the project is would be helpful, because as you'll hear from Mr. Hill in a little bit, the second project on your agenda is a little bit different. But it is agendized for action if you wish to do that.
Okay, okay, thank you, Lance. Yes, Supervisor Baker.
So in the previous project that we approved, that went through several standing committees, is that the plan again, or is it just coming through our standing committee?
Great question. I think that's entirely up to the board. You have board rules that don't allow one committee to overrule another. And speaking with Chair Gibbs, the second project that you're hearing about is a different process, and the executive committee talked about how those processes should work with PFA, and the direction that staff received relative to Public Finance Authority projects was to have them go through this committee, and this committee not only, but that was the starting point. If you wish to refer it elsewhere, you certainly can do that. There isn't clear direction on which committees need to take up additional resolutions. Certainly additional discussion of the general conduit bonding projects. The benefit of having the presentation, and that's what we tried to get Mr. Dvorak in front of you relatively soon, was to record the presentation and make it available. So it's entirely up to you. Future committees, I can certainly send out, regardless of whether you want to take action today, send out a link to the recording as well as the packet to make sure that people are informed about it. But really, there's there's nothing within your rules that requires multiple committees to look at it. There's nothing that prohibits you from taking action, but it's also not clear. I mean, we're kind of figuring it out as we go. We hadn't historically had too many of these projects, certainly in my time before.
Okay, thanks, Lance. Supervisor Baker?
I thought that the process of where it was discussed at multiple committees helped define the comfort level on the board, and also, you know, each different committees had different areas of concern. So to me, it seems like it would be good to have a little more buy-in than just the four of us, you know, before we voted. I don't know what the rest of the members think.
Supervisor Unger?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Dave, Supervisor Baker. I would like to see it forwarded to other committees that pertinent to this information before it went to the board.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea to me, too,
And if I can share one other thing, we did discuss about having a full educational presentation. This was a time when Mr. Dvorak could actually be here, so having him in person was kind of the reason to start out with this committee as well. So we certainly can take that process of having these materials circulated to all members of the board and have another presentation to the full board with Mr. Dvorak appearing virtually, if that's...
Sure, happy to come up and go through another presentation, make sure everybody's comfortable with it. And like I said, we'd love to host a tour out at our facility in Darlington, just down by Madison, if anybody's interested, also see something in action. It's a lot different to see it as opposed to see pictures of it, so.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would feel more comfortable, too, that if it went to other committees, to take a look at, and probably the full county board before we make a decision, to at least the presentation part of it, so. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, moving on to 6B, consideration of request of Marathon County, Wisconsin to approve the public financial authorizations and conduit issue for not to exceed 25 million exempt facility revenue bond to benefit Buckhorn RNG LLC project. And we have with us today is Mark Hill.
And if I could just kick us off, just again, I should have probably done this the last time, but just to ground everyone again, this is a different process that you're going to hear about from Mr. Hill. Same general idea in terms of the project itself, but the process for financing that they're seeking authorization from the county is a little bit different. So just high-level overview, there are essentially, in my mind, and I'm probably wrong, but simple way to look at it, there are three ways for these kind of financing to move forward relative to county involvement. The first, based on what Mr. Dvorak just showed you and what you're familiar with from the previous project, is industrial revenue bonding, county involvement in that process under section 66.1103 of the statutes. The second is financing that requires the county's authorization through the Public Finance Authority. And again, we discussed this at the full board level with the previous project. But essentially, the PFA serves as the issuer of those bonds. And then the third is similar to the Bug Tussle project the county funded some time ago. And that is the county serving as the conduit bonding agent, but actually taking on some of the liability that Mr. Dvorak referenced before. So this is the second of those three options. And with that, Mr. Chair, turn it over to Mr. Hill, and I will scroll as you direct.
Thank you, appreciate it. And I think I've got a presentation in there as well. We can start with that. There we go. So thanks for having me. I'm Mark Hill, co-CEO of Novia RNG. We are the parent company of Buckhorn RNG. Buck is named Buckhorn because Marathon County has some of the highest number of trophy bucks in the entire state of Wisconsin. So we try to tie it a little bit to wherever we're at. So I'll talk a little bit about our company, talk a little bit about the project, and then get into the actual request we're making here. So next slide. Yep. And then we'll go next one here. So our leadership team, I've been in the renewable natural gas space for 14 years. I served as Vice President of Operations for DT Biomass Energy for about, I was with that company for about 12 years. And ran 21 landfill gas energy projects, along with my industry peer here. We were some of the first to get into the dairy RNG space. So I ended up running 8 dairy RNG projects, along with the 21 landfill gas projects for them. Upon leaving, I started up Novia RNG in 2020. My co-CEO, Jared Williams, who also worked with me at DT, joined me in April of 2021, and since then we have been we originate, we permit, we build, we own, and we operate all our projects. So we do these soup to nuts all the way through with Novia. Our entire team are veterans in this industry who I cherry-picked from people I know in the industry. So Matt Brubaker, our CFO, came from DT, and then all of our folks have a lot of experience in processing natural gas, helium, and landfill gas and dairy RNG projects. Next slide. And so currently we've got 2 projects in operations, one right here in Wisconsin. It's in Berlin, Wisconsin, just outside of Oshkosh. That's been in operation since September of this year. Of last year. It's been running well north of 90% on stream rate. Matter of fact, it was just a couple production records last week out there, so we've been very happy with the performance. No public complaints about it, no noise complaints, no odor complaints, and as a matter of fact, we've gotten some compliments from the farmer as they were applying their manure that it didn't smell this year. Which was the only change that they had made was putting it through a digester now. And that's part of the digester process. And one of the benefits you get from it is we're destroying a lot of the volatile solids, the things that cause smells, and converting them into methane. We also have a project in construction right now in Iowa, one in operations in Michigan, and our Buckhorn project is well under construction here in Marathon County. We've got 35 employees total working across the country on this. So we'll talk a little bit about the Buckhorn project itself. Next slide. One more. And so there's something called second mover advantage. So when somebody's already explained to you the process once, I don't have to do it again. So I appreciate that. But just very simply, the manure gets collected out of the barns. This dairy is converting over to fiber bedding, which is great for digestion. That manure then gets pumped into our anaerobic digesters. Will be for 25 to 30 days typically. It's stirred, it's heated up to about 101 degrees, which is close to the body temperature of a cow, right? And those little bacteria-like organisms will eat it, the volatile solids, convert that energy into the biogas. Typically, in our projects, about 57% methane, 43% carbon dioxide. We then take that into our biogas upgrading plant, where we strip out the carbon dioxide, we strip out the water, and we strip out the hydrogen sulfide that we don't want. The carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide get sent to a thermal oxidizer, which acts as a big oven and converts that into, at least the hydrogen sulfide, into a non-toxic, which is sulfur dioxide. And we consider that to be the gold standard of environmental controls for these projects. So basically we have a flare there and a big oven to make sure that we're meeting our air permit, which we have received from the state of Wisconsin. From there, the process gas gets put into a WEC pipeline, We Energy, that is already built. They're building the interconnect. I was just out there this morning, and some of the piping and foundations are going in right now for that. And then that gets sold. It can be used as vehicle fuel. California is typically the biggest market, but there's many other markets. Minnesota has just become a larger market, Canada, Europe. But the great thing about natural gas is it travels well. And so we're able to find the highest value markets for this gas. Once the digestate leaves, basically the manure leaves the digester, is called digestate. This farm then puts it through a series of screw presses that squeezes out the liquids. Those liquids go to the lagoon, and then the fiber portion of it actually gets used for bedding for the cows. And so typically sand is used for bedding, especially here because glacial sand is very abundant and cheap here in Wisconsin. Not so much in many other places of the country, but this acts as kind of a neat circle here where they're no longer having to bring in sand and they can use the fiber being processed. It looks a lot like potting soil if you were to look at it. Next slide, please. So this is it. This is what's going up right now in Brighton Township. So this picture was taken 2 weeks ago. First, I'll start off with all necessary permits were received. I was here exactly a year ago in front of the county board to receive a conditional use permit for this. The building permits, the air permits, we've got the pipeline interconnect agreement in place, and so we're going to be starting this up this summer. We start construction in August. I think I'll be done June timeframe with construction. And we have already hired our facility manager, and then we have 2 additional facility technician who will be running this project. Some of the things we're really proud of for this, no workplace injuries, and startup approaches, we're going to make sure to incorporate the first responders and work it through, give them tours of the site, and make sure that they understand how to respond to any emergencies on our sites. Thus far, for all our projects, we have had no emergencies and no workplace injuries across our entire fleet. So, if you were to look at that picture, the big tanky there, as you see there, that's the digester itself. That's 2.5 million gallons. And behind it is our manure pumping and heating building, where we keep a boiler to heat up the manure. We heat that to about, again, 101 degrees. The building you see to the bottom right is our RNG upgrading building, and that's where the gas will be processed to pipeline quality. Our membranes strip out 95% of the hydrogen sulfide. The last 5% of it goes through those 2 tanks you see there that act as a polisher to meet pipeline quality spec. And then the building you see in the bottom left is our electric building and office for our employees. And when I was out there, I did check the sign-in log, and we had 19 construction workers out there. Sargent Electric is local to northern Wisconsin. Concrete was local. A lot of the excavation services are local as well. And so this, you can see some of the insides of the buildings, our flare being put up 2 weeks ago, the digester being insulated. And if you ever want to see what the inside of a digester looks like, it looks a little bit like a UFO. And if you were to clap your hands, it's the largest echo you've ever heard in your life. But that's what the inside of a digester looks like. Yeah. So what is our request? So we talked that this is a little bit different from other ways of getting financing. Because we already had a significant amount of projects in Wisconsin, we have one on operations, this one's under construction, and we're going to have several more going underway. We were advised the more straightforward approach for us personally was to issue the debt bonds through the Public Financing Authority. So that way it's going through one conduit. We have obtained initial resolutions from the PFA to be the conduit issuer for the bonds, and Buckhorn RNG obtained the carry forward volume cap for the PFA to be the conduit issuer. So this has all been approved already through the Public Finance Authority. One thing in Wisconsin is that the Public Finance Authority requires us to check with the counties and the townships to make sure that they are in line with this and they're okay with the Public Financing Authority being the conduit issuer bond, for the bonds. And that is what we're asking for you today, is to consent for that to be forwarded to the County Board of Supervisors for the March 19th meeting, that they can vote on this and consent for the Public Finance Authority to be conduit issuer. Okay, just a couple key items on here. Neither the Public Finance Authority nor the county will be liable for payment of the principal and interest on the bonds. Neither the PFA nor the county will have ongoing responsibilities for reporting any of this. The bonds do not count against the county's borrowing capacity. The county will not levy a tax for the payment of the bonds. And the PFA and county will be reimbursed for all fees and costs incurred in connection with the issuance of the bonds. And so a little bit about on the safety side, and we take this extraordinarily seriously. We have our environmental control devices. We talked about that the flare and the thermal oxidizer are designed to combust odor-causing compounds. We have to monitor what's going into them at all times, the temperature inside of them. We have to get an air permit. We have to submit that data to the state of Wisconsin on a regular basis. We have to submit any violations of it on a regular basis. We've been running since July the flare at our Wisconsin facility, and we've had no violations. So we try to use well-proven technology on this, and thus far it's been proven very successful. And on the safety side, our employees get trained on hydrogen sulfide safety, on methane safety, fire detection, first aid, operating pipelines, et cetera, et cetera. So we have an extensive safety program for them. We're in compliance with all construction safety standards. And again, I think as we get probably late spring, we'll be working with the local first responders to do a site tour. And the benefits for this, we get two highly skilled full-time jobs. We got the ongoing construction from last year and this year, using a lot of local contractors for this. And I think it also, in many ways, future-proofs agriculture here in Marathon County. More and more, the global food producers look at milk, and they're starting to look at the carbon intensity of milk, especially with some of the negative press, rightly or wrongly, I personally think wrongly, that dairy has received. And by having these digesters at those sites, a lot of the global consumers of this milk view it very favorably, that this is a greener quality that's coming out of this versus a dairy that did not have one of these digester projects. And so I think for the next 30 years, this helps solidify the ability of this area to produce milk. And then one of the other pieces of this is there's about a 4-mile pipeline that's being run into Unity. Unity does have gas service, but there are several, and similar to the previous project you heard about, we're not owning it, we're not operating it, the utility is. But one of the pluses of this is consumers along those lines, houses, can hook up to those natural gas lines and get themselves off of propane. And propane runs probably about 3 times the cost of natural gas. So there is a benefit on a person-to-person basis along that 4-mile line. Okay, we expect this project to make somewhere around 80,000 MMBTUs of renewable natural gas per year. That's about 700,000 gallons of gasoline equivalent. We're not making gasoline, but just to give you an idea of just how much energy that is. And that's, we think the greenhouse gas removal is equivalent to taking about 4,900 cars a year off the road. So with that, any questions?
Questions from the committee? Supervisor Baker.
So my questions pertain more to the logistics of the financing, I guess. So we've been told in previous, the previous project that the county has to sign off on this, on the PFA's financing. And we've also been told that you can't start work until you have initial resolution. So I'm wondering how that works. You're almost done with construction or much of the way through construction. the initial resolution has already been issued, it seems, and now you're asking us to sign off. So mostly, I'm just trying to understand how that process works.
Yeah, so we got Linda, who's our counsel on the phone. She may chime in if I'm off.
Yeah.
This, but there's nothing requiring us to have the municipal debt bonds or the resolution in place before we start work, as long as we already had the financial capability to do it. And so we made, as a company, the decision to go ahead and do this project with funding that we had on hand to do it. As we look at the numerous projects we have in here in Wisconsin, looking at our 2024 and 2025 construction queue going forward, we are looking now for municipal debt funding for that. And generally, the people who buy this debt feel much better having a project up and running to look at as part of that portfolio, because it's less risky, right? There's less construction risk, there's less execution risk that you're going to run into, and that's why we went with this approach. Linda, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes. First of all, the question, you clearly listened to the earlier presentation. There's a concept in federal law that says you can only include in a bond financing those costs that were incurred no more than 60 days before the date you got an inducement resolution. So the previous presenter was asking for an inducement resolution and to qualify because that's their plan of finance. This project for both Buckhorn and the other project that they're working on right now and are going to issue as one bond issue, both have obtained initial resolutions from the PFA. One of them, they had substantial money in the project before they got the PFA resolution. So that means not all of those costs they incurred more than 60 days before that resolution will not be refinanced with bonds. With the other project, they got the PFA resolution at a different time, several months different. I was not involved in getting that, but I have reviewed those resolutions. So they will still qualify, but the amount that qualifies will vary depending on that 60-day look back. So as they were assembling these projects, they looked to the PFA because it has multi-jurisdictional powers. It can issue for projects that are located in more than one location. And so as we then started building out a timeline, we have to comply with a unique element of the PFA statute that simply says the county and the town where the projects are located, if they want to use the PFA, the county and the town must consent. And this is not an endorsement of the project. It's not an approval of the project. It's simply a quirky element that was put in the statute. And I think I have shared with you before, but I will share again. That was put in the statute in my mind because there were a couple counties who thought they were going to issue a lot of conduit bonds during the period when we had Midwest disaster area bonds. And so that was about the same time that the PFA was organized. And those two counties, Dane and Milwaukee, lobbied to say, we want to be able to consent first because they thought maybe they could talk people into issuing through them. They wanted to do it. The truth of it is they haven't done any of it, but it's now in the statute and it's a little step that we have to take before we can proceed with the PFA.
So that answers part of my question. And
What was the other part? I missed it.
I don't mean to be I'm not saying this would cause me to not support the project. I just want to make sure we're doing things by the rules. You just said, and in your earlier presentation, I don't remember the exact timing, but you just said it's in the statutes that the county has to approve before. So I'm saying, does that have to happen before the initial resolution, or can that happen after the initial resolution?
No, they have to approve before the PFA can actually issue the bonds. And so they got that inducement resolution from the PFA. They might never have used it. Just as the previous applicant comes to you, it's like a stake in the ground, a place saver that would allow them to use bonds if they decided to proceed to use bonds. And so getting the PFA inducement resolution doesn't mean anything other than it preserves eligibility for certain costs. It doesn't guarantee that the borrower is going to follow that plan of finance. And so it would be premature for them to come to you for a consent at that time when they're not even sure they're going to do a PFA bond issue. They're preserving eligibility by getting that inducement resolution.
Okay, thank you. That answered that question. Then the final question I have is, I believe at our full board meeting, we discussed, and I don't recall the resolution, if we reached a resolution or the answer, we discussed who's has the authority, what the process is for the county granting that. And I thought there was discussion whether that lies with the county administrator or whether that requires board approval. But I don't remember the answer to that, so maybe.
The statute says that it can either be given by the highest elected county administrator or county executive by certificate or by the county board, and that's your local practice or preference. So I believe, and Lance can answer that, I believe that the conclusion was that the county wanted to have the board provide that consent, or at least direct the administrator to sign the certificate.
That is correct, Attorney Templin. So that was the discussion that took place at Executive Committee, because I think under the reading of the statutes, one of the attorney for Wisconsin Counties Association, lead attorney Andy Phillips, my understanding was that he gave the exact same opinion that the county administrator has the authority to approve these projects. And I said, that's great, but I'm not going to do that. I want some direction from the board about how that process should work. And that was the discussion at the Executive Committee, was to arrive at what does that process look like. And the discussion there yielded a result of, if there's a request for PFA, financing through PFA, it should go to this committee, the Extension Education Economic Development Committee, for consideration, and then a recommendation to the full board for action. So as Mr. Hill referenced, I think the request of this committee here today, based on the timing of their project, as explained by Mr. Hill and Attorney Templin, is for this committee to consider action, and should you forward it on to the full board, it would go to the full board in March. And then if approved, there are a series of documents that the clerk Trueblood would execute.
Okay, thank you, Lance. And Supervisor Marash has a
Thank
question.
you. Just one more question for both of you. I'm concerned about neighboring property owners and their wells. Is there any kind of safeguards you put in place regarding that?
Yeah, so we have to follow all the ordinances, both township and county, on distance from wells on this, and that actually goes with any manure storage. So we have to follow the same rules that a farmer might have if they're putting in a lagoon and the distance to those wells. If anything, these digester projects help with water quality. We get a lot of pathogen kill because this has been in there for 3 weeks at 101 degrees. And the farmers like it because the bedding that comes out of this has a much lower rate of mastitis infection coming from it. But it also helps with like E. coli and things like that. And so the process itself, if you think about it, all that's happening is instead of the dairy taking their manure right into their lagoon and then eventually field applying it once or twice a year, is making a pit stop in our digester where we bake it's too hard of a word, but digest it for 3 weeks, take down the volatile solids that cause odor, have a good pathogen kill on there, and then it goes back in their lagoon. So it's just making a pit stop, and then they do the same thing every year that they were doing before. So we're not adding more cows, we're not adding more materials, anything like that to the process.
The other thing that's a benefit is when manure goes through an anaerobic digester, the organic nitrogen in the manure gets converted into inorganic nitrogen. The reason this is important is plants like inorganic nitrogen better. There's a more efficient uptake. So as far as water quality, it's better it's a better utilized fertilizer when it goes through a digestion process than if it doesn't go through the digestion process. That process starts in a lagoon, but it's not fully complete, whereas it goes through a digester, it gets fully complete. So as Mark had indicated, pathogen kill, better utilization for uptick. The reason why his farmer said it didn't smell is because of that conversion process from the organic to inorganic process. And so the farmer that applies this can apply less conventional fertilizer if they use digestate from a digester.
Excuse me. Thank you. Any other questions? Supervisor Lemmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So are you both confident that neither Lynn Dairy nor Miltram are expanding their herds?
So I will not say, you'd have to ask Lynn Dairy for that. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the farmer.
So the water could be impacted if they did, though. The digester itself is not going to impact the water, but if it were to expand the herd, that could change the water and the wells then. And
So
the
again, you'd
consumption.
have to talk to the dairy. They have to go through a separate process through the state of Wisconsin anytime they want to make changes to their CAFOs. That's totally separate from our digester facility. And we view this as we're not here to encourage them to expand or anything like this. All we're doing is taking the manure that they have, and that goes up and down by 5%. They just you have a couple more cows each month, or whatever the case may be, but it all goes to our digester, and we extract the value from that. So we don't get involved in the dairy's expansion plans.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Supervisor Baker?
So do I understand that the motion's in order?
Yes, it is.
I would make a motion that we approve the use of PFA, of this bond being issued by PFA and have the advance to the full board.
Second by Supervisor Bulk. Excuse me. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And Andy and Mark, thanks again. Okay, moving on to 6C, consideration of the UW extension proposed transition to the regional agricultural educational model. Jeremy.
All right. Thank you, Chair Seifelt. So in your packet is that document. We started this discussion last month, but quick recap. Basically, this is moving from a county-based model for our agricultural education positions to a regional model. And what we would do is basically to form a two-county region that would include Clark and Marathon County, and add an educator, kind of an educator and a half to the current situation. So right now, Marathon County has one dairy and livestock educator, and in the proposal, we would move to two counties with, continue with Heather's position as dairy and livestock educator, but add a crops and soils educator, and also carry forward a position that currently exists in Clark County, a dairy and livestock educator to also serve both Marathon and Clark counties as well. So the upshot is to Marathon County, no change in the funding, so same funding level, but in addition of an educator and a whole new program area. Right now with the dairy and livestock educator, obviously focus on dairy farms in the county, which has been great and needed. But obviously there's more than just dairy farming happening in the county. So the crops and soils educator would expand the programming that's being done, supporting other farmers who are growing other crops. The focus of that program really is on improved profitability for farms, conservation practices to improve water quality and soil health. And like with all of these positions, it comes with all of the kind of research being done by the university and statewide specialists in that area as well that we're currently not tapping into, basically. So from my perspective, it's a pretty good situation for Marathon County, additional educators and additional programming, and the same cost, basically, for the county. There is mention in the proposal that at some point when there's a retirement, which is several years down the road, we may look to potentially expand that region, so that's not more than 2 counties, but that's several years down the road. So I'm happy to take any questions or concerns. Yeah.
Clarify what you just said, it be expanded to more than 2 counties, or it would be, I think you said to not more than 2 counties?
It could be in the future expanded to include an additional county or 2, but that would be, the soonest it'd be 4 to 5 years, I think. So but that's the mention of the kind of initial situation at this point, yeah.
Thank you, Jeremy. Any other questions from committee or supervisors? So you are looking for a motion for this consideration to go to the full county board?
Yes, a bit of a question. We so we would like a motion approval from this committee. Whether it needs to go to the full county board because there's no real change in the funding, I mean, that would be up to you. From our standpoint and extension, we don't need that. Lance and I have also been trying to figure out the process a little bit from extension standpoint. We also don't need like an update to the contract because no funding has changed, but we will be happy to, kind of do whatever the county would like to see.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Jeremy referenced. It's not really a change in, I shouldn't say not really. It is not a change in service delivery as I understand it because the educators are still there. There's no requirement under our current system if Heather, who is our local agent, is doing a training. If someone comes from Lincoln County, we don't kick them out. People attend those educational opportunities. They receive services regardless of kind of their specific border. So it's not a programmatic change. It's also not a fiscal change relative to the budget. So there's no budget amendment necessary. If there is a request on whether I think this is a good idea, I really think this is a good idea for the long-term reason that Jeremy referenced, that it kind of starts to match the way that Extension operates already with the potential funding change of Marathon County actually having to put less in. People are already attending trainings, not based on necessarily what county they're in. It's based on what trainings are being offered and kind of where they are located. If someone's on the far southwest side of the county, they're probably not going to come to trainings offered in Wausau anyway. They might go to something in Marshfield. So I think this is a good idea. There's no fiscal impact, certainly no negative fiscal impact. There's a potential for a positive fiscal impact long term. But even in the current situation, there's no programmatic or fiscal impact this year.
So all we would need is a motion for this committee. We would not have to proceed to the full county board, correct?
Mr. Chair, I believe Corporation Counsel Pierner is on, and sorry, Mike, to put you on the spot, but that was my thought as well in speaking with Jeremy. I don't know that there's a requirement that it goes to the full board. I know Extension is of the position that they would like some form of county endorsement to moving in this direction. So that's why we're at the committee at all.
Right. I am here, Lance and Chair Seifelt. I would agree that per our rules and statute, there's not a legal requirement that we take this through to the county board, but certainly you can choose to do so. The reason there's no legal requirement is, as Jeremy alluded to, there's no change in the funding structure here. However, if you chose to send it to the full board, you could do that as well.
Okay, thank you. I would think we would just do a motion within the committee. So if someone would want to make that motion, or do we? Supervisor Unger.
Thank you, Chair. I make a motion through the Extension Area 7 Agriculture Educational Position Plan proposal be approved by the EEE Board.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second? Second by Supervisor Book. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Yeah.
Moving
you.
on to 7, Education Presentation and Committee Discussion. 7A, Marathon County Extension 2023 Annual Report. Jeremy.
Yes, I'll just be brief. You obviously have it in your packet and to review. You've had a lot to sort through today, so I won't go through in detail, but just a couple of comments about this. We intentionally kind of changed the timeline of the annual report. Last year, I think it got done in the summer or something, which didn't make a whole lot of sense to me that we were, 6-7 months out from the previous year. So I asked the educators and office staff to pull this together earlier. And so I'm happy with how it came together. They did a good job of kind of summarizing their work from the past year. So you have kind of the highlights from each of the program areas, some of the, kind of high level numbers of folks that they've worked with, partners that they've worked with, some of the impacts that have been identified in their major areas of work. So you have that for each of the programs, so you can go through those in detail. But I'm happy to answer any questions. We've started this process last month with Janelle's program with horticulture, and we'll continue this out in the future with going through each program as well. But if if at any point, but particularly today, if there is feedback for different areas of focus, gaps you're seeing in programs, we're always interested in that. And I will say, coming out of last month's discussion with Janelle and the horticulture program, she is kind of embarking on a broader needs assessment based on some of the discussions that we had and some of what she presented. So that kind of kicked her off into looking at some other areas of work as well. So anyway, happy to take any questions on the annual report. And then the one question I have is just kind of next steps. We would like this to be forwarded on to the full board, and whether there would be a presentation at that. I know that's happened in the past. I don't think we did that last year, but just thoughts about kind of how to share this information with the board. Another kind of strategic part of the timing of this is that this will be an educational resource, obviously, for the new committee and for new board members as well. So that was another reason why we decided to do it at this time. So.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Jeremy? So you are looking to put this annual report maybe in for the new board that's coming? Or I would think it would be a benefit to put it in for the new board because, some of us might not be here. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Jeremy. We will proceed with that. Go right ahead.
Thank you.
Next meeting date, time, announcements, and future agenda items. Committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. 8B, next meeting, Thursday, April 4th, 2024 at 3 p.m. And I will take a motion for adjournment. Motion by Supervisor Book, second by Supervisor Baker. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.